It feels like there's a brand new wave that's coming into the consciousness collective where we're requiring new perspectives that look different to what we're familiar with. And right now, so much of spirituality is still caught up in their waves of viewing reality from some traditional style or like this new age style. But the consciousness that I'm starting to recognize that's there, that wants to become there, is like a type of technological consciousness. It's
I agree with you.
acceptance of the mind as a computer and we can regenerate reality. It's just we don't know what that looks like yet.
I absolutely agree with you. And it should evolve. We have never been where we are at before. And I was actually sharing this with the group, the circle that I host, that I run, and I was sharing with them how I'm like, listen, there is no yellow brick road. We're building it as we go, brick by brick, right? There is no playbook anymore. We are creating it as we go. So let's throw the old stuff out. Everybody's so focused on the past, and we can visit that, right, for pearls of wisdom and inspiration. But let's focus in the now moment on what we are creating. And so that absolutely will evolve. And I think what we're truly seeing and what the community speaks into, and they almost contradict themselves in this, they speak into multidimensionality, but are they really allowing multidimensionality to take form in our experience? Because we will have certain, I like when you refer to it as databases because it makes so much sense. It absolutely lands. Databases that we can tap into. We can look at the natural world, right? We can look into nature as one database where we pull code from. We can look at the technological standpoint, that database, pull code from that. There's many different levels to this, and it is multidimensional, but they seem to be fixated on one certain point and not allowing the multidimensionality to evolve and flow.
Yeah, there's something to wanting to guide the multidimensionality towards a type of uniformity where we all agree that this is what the multidimensionality is. And it makes sense. I mean, it does seem the higher up you go in your consciousness, reality starts to structure in a way which only you can understand, and it's put together in a type of symmetry. So there are ideas that do exist there that should be there and ideas that shouldn't. But even
Mm.
that starts to kind of fade away because you come to an acceptance about everything in its place. And that may be the true multidimensionality, is acceptance of the conditions of reality, however they may appear. It's all about making
Mm.
use of the current situation now. And you'll find anything that you can flip around 180 and make it better. And I think that's like that quality to consciousness to be able to take things, flip it around, make use of it, that I don't really see too much in the spiritual circles. It's always about how the new world order is going to come and get us, and here's how you got to prepare or whatever. But there isn't too much talk about like how to prepare yourself internally. And even if there is, that education is still very dull right now.
Yeah, and I think this really goes into what we've talked about before in terms of angles of perception and going within and cultivating the internal world, which we know that internal cultivation leads to an external manifestation. And I think through that, you're right, there hasn't been much of a dialogue in how we can prepare ourselves in that way. It's very much all externally focused, right? But we know that there's value in cultivating within, because that really truly leads to what's happening within the external. We can bend that, we can shift that, we can look at all the different lines of creation that come to a certain point and branch out to other points. So I think being able to acknowledge that, navigate that, the awareness around that in of itself is a powerful thing.
Yeah, it's all about being aware of where your power is going and where it's leaking to. And so many things that you can hold in your consciousness can be true, but if having it to be true for you right then and there is causing you to leak power, then it's not the best thing to believe. And that's what we talked about in the last episode. How something can be true, but you believing it is false right now because it's not working. And how you can believe some things that are false that believing it now to be true for you actually improves you. And that's just another dynamic of how things are flipped around. You can make use of any situation, and it just works. Which is why it is
Yeah.
kind of hard to judge another person's journey accurately, because whatever someone's going through, like they need to go through it. That's why they're going through it. And that's what I really start to see, like in terms of trying to help people, or how do you help people on the spiritual journey? Most time you just have to leave people alone and let them do their own thing, and give them helpful advice every now and then. But life itself will merge together with the person, and that's the whole development process we're all trying to learn, is building a relationship to reality. You can't help anyone through that necessarily.
Well, I think there's another piece too that happens in the community is that people take on the savior complex, or they feel like they are the one that needs to be sought out. They have the knowledge. They are gatekeeping this wisdom that you need to get access to by, you know, spending time in their energy field or buying their expensive program, whatever it may be. And that's just not the case. Life will serve you with opportunity, each person, to cultivate their awareness, to engage in their journey, to learn how to navigate whatever path they choose to take. It's all different levels that we're all served with at any given time. And we're allowed to evolve at our own pace. We're allowed to be at different levels in terms of our journey, in terms of levels of consciousness. It's okay to have access to different planes and how we're moving through those planes. And we were talking about that with building out. It could be vertical or horizontal. There's so much to explore, and you can pull so much information and data on your personal journey, but you can't control how someone is moving through the levels, right? You can't control if they are moving up vertically or horizontally, or if they're at a fixed point. Some people do need to be stationary in what they're going through, and they'll move when they're meant to move.
Yeah, every state has a purpose. And it's like those level systems, I think that those are the databases. So there's the Earth database, the nature database, the tech database, all these databases we're pulling information from. Maybe how well that you've explored each sector of reality is you exploring the levels. So how many databases that you're assembling and you're familiar with determines how much access you have into information. Because that's the thing about intelligence, for instance, you can't really claim intelligence is your own. And at the root of consciousness, it seems like that's all we're doing, is we're interacting with various forms of intelligence.
Mm.
So yeah, the level system, it's vertical, it's horizontal at the same time. And I think that especially within the spiritual community, people get very familiar with navigating their own database, which they continuously go back to retrieve information from. But I think as multidimensional beings, we have to explore multiple types of places to get information from. Even if it sounds, you know, contradictory or paradoxical, those are usually where you find things that are different. From this end to this end, you find something in the middle, and then you find another end from that. And that's how you literally explore information, is find the ends of things.
Right. And different angles of perception. Because when we were talking about our, let's say, holographic nature of reality, right? Different angles of perception can come in. And for me, the way I view it is that it creates a higher resolution to the holograph. So there's more angles, there's more light, there's more information that you can use to build out, to project out.
Yeah, basically, that's one thing I've recognized. The more conscious you get, the pixels start to generate more pixels within it. So
Right?
your reality becomes like a vector. And so
Yeah.
wherever you're looking at, there's more of you that information can seek in through. And so that's why we talked about earlier in the other episode how you just start to get really intuitive about things that you previously were not intuitive about, and information starts to be filtered automatically through you, and you just know when something's true or false depending upon what you need to know now. And that's really what intuition is. I think it's that interpreting mechanism of reality for how we can like recognize the pixels and how they're arranged. Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. It's true. It does come through in that way. It is very intuitive. And I think that intuitive nature is important, especially when it's coming to aid in discernment. Because that's another piece, I think, within the communities, is it almost muddies up your ability to discern because they really push that it's this way, right? And if you're asking questions, right, they really don't, in many circles, appreciate that you're questioning what they are sharing. And that's what I've noticed in my own personal experience and through observation, is that whenever I would ask a question, again, am I met with curiosity and intrigue, or am I met with condemnation? So through my intuitive nature, feeling into and being able to discern, well, you know what, if I can't ask a question, this really doesn't feel like it's for me. I really don't want to be a part of this if we can't ask questions. Because questions branch us out and lead to other angles of perception.
Yeah, that's where the totality of truth appears to lie, is in the never ending quest for more information. It's never at some end point. That's one thing I never really liked about the religious structures. You know, we talked about, I went to church like 4 or 5 times a week. I don't know how often you went to church, but
Oh, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I went to Catholic school. I was an altar server. So I was like really in the church as well. So I learned a lot from that experience.
and that's really the environment that is. I mean, this is the fixed way we view reality, and everything else is bad. And if you even question it, it just means you haven't learned what you need to learn yet. And so just keep having faith, even though it doesn't make sense. That paradigm, I think, is what's going away for a lot of people. With the advance of technology and social media information, we now just know that there's other worlds out there. And before, we didn't really have access to that information. So I think that we're also witnessing the death of the religious structures to a certain extent, which will have problems because we sort of need those to maintain our morality in a way. But even that's kind of changing. Because I would say
Yeah.
I feel almost more like more Christ-like, just being myself now, but not having to believe those things than all the people that I knew who were explicitly in the church trying to be Christ-like. It's strange.
It is strange. And I've been witnessing and observing dialogues around this, where, again, if you don't align with their particular idea of Christ and what that looks like, then you're, considered bad or against the church. It's like, again, it's like they want you to be on one side or the other. And they're not allowing people to evolve in their own personal relationship with what Christ or, being Christ-like means for them in their experience. It has to look a certain way. We need to follow this. You need to know the scriptures. If you don't do it this way, it's not the right way. So there's been a lot of that I think many of us have been witnessing, especially too over the past, I would say over the past year, there was an interesting switch that was happening. And it almost appeared that, and it was like that was planned this way, which would make sense. Like, okay, they're waking up to their multidimensional selves, their multidimensional aspects. Let's cull them back into religion this way. And so I saw a lot of people switching over and going back to now following the religious ideals and being really immersed in, religious doctrine and really condemning any of the new age or spiritual communities And again, there's distortions within both. There's inversions within both.
Yeah, it just ultimately comes down to making use of what you're finding and researching and what you're applying to your life. Like, for instance, when I was vegan and I had my little store there at a physical juice bar for a couple years, that being vegan was what turned me on to researching health and understanding like holistic nutrition and herbalism and Ayurveda and all the Chinese medicine. I got super into all of that at that time, but yet veganism didn't work for me. But if I never had gone vegan and away from all the processed food, then I probably would have never, come to certain conclusions. So we can even enter into things that don't serve us as far as like an ideology, but then we travel along the path and then we find our version of the truth. So I think Christianity and religion and all that stuff is sort of like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it goes back to as well what we were speaking into in terms of your intuition and being able to discern what is right for you and what isn't. You tried out veganism, but through that experience, you were able to discern this isn't working for me. And you moved on from that, right? You evolved along your path that way. And we're allowed to do that. The evolvement, again, is natural, it's healthy, and it's experiential learning. That's ultimately how we learn, through direct experience. We can be told or we can be shown, but ultimately, through direct experience, that's where you're really getting that direct line of communication with the experience and cultivating that intuitively.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have the experience for it, then you'll never know. That's how you formulate what things are for you. You have to always compare this or that to yourself to determine where you should go next. It's like an algorithm of exploration of your mind. And that's why experiences and gain experiences is the most important thing for reality and for your spirituality, which is what we talked about earlier as well. How a lot of spirituality has become just sitting in your bedroom and journaling your thoughts and trying to build out your emotional world in the comfort of your own home. But when you go out in the world, you're always met with some distortion that you think is yourself. So then you need to go back into your home again to be comfortable. And the process of awakening seems like to avoid all that, just go out into the world and life will serve you those events to learn. And you'll almost learn it in real time anyway. So that's what spirituality starts to become, is taking action upon your intuition in the moment.
Yeah, I actually refer to that as being, moving, living, breathing alchemy. In whatever now moment, whatever is coming into your field, right? Because we do have the ability to transmute it. We have the ability to cultivate energy. We can manipulate it. We can do whatever we need to do with what comes into our field. So in that now moment, right? In that direct experience. And exactly as we've been speaking into, life will give you the opportunities to do that. You don't have to always sit down and carve it out. And that's the other thing I think the community really pushes, is doing the work, and so much focus on the doing as opposed to the being. And they place so much emphasis and importance on like the tools themselves. So the meditation, which is great if you want to do that, but that is just a tool, right? Or they'll push, the crystals or all the other things. But what about the direct experience in the now moment?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the conversation, because some of those things, they appear to work, but it's always interesting. What if you took those things away from you? You're almost taking apart all of your identity that you've built up to do these things. And so we form a type of pattern around objects, and even objects as thoughts that we need to interact with in order to maintain this state. So my thing has always been, what if I just take everything away and I'm just me? You'll find that all the self and all the realities that you're experiencing when you're up leveling are always a result of what's coming from you anyway. So it never is the crystal. It never is the Power of the Now book that's right there, or your meditation journal, or whatever.
Right.
It's the experience is always created within you, and whatever you need to have arranged in your external world to get you to tap into that is whatever that you think you need. The same thing is found like in tarot cards, which is kind of a strange topic because those appear to work for some people in some way. But I would even argue that with tarot cards, for instance, you don't need to pull a card to get a memory of what you need to talk about now. Just talk about what you need to talk about right now.
Right.
All of it
Yeah.
is just a
There's too much
charades.
emphasis on the actual tools and using that to tap into the information streams, right, that are coming in that we have access to, right? The frequency ranges, the bandwidth. But we are the greatest tool that exists. We are the greatest technology that exists. We are a powerful and beautiful organic and biological technology. We have everything within us to tap into anything that we need. So the tools are just a tool. And if you want to use them as such, that's fine. But recognize that it is just a tool and you actually don't need any of it. It could be an extension of your field, right, that you can use to pull in more streams of data or to refine even, right, and into finer alignment. Maybe a little deeper of an insight if you feel you need it in that moment, but you really don't need anything.
Yeah, a tool is just a template of operation. I mean, we're always interacting with different tools all the time. And so you don't want to place too much dependency that you need this tool. Only apply certain tools into your life if they're streamlining that process better and you know how the tool is built and how it's made and what it is to use the tool and what it is to not use the tool. And that really determines where that tool is useful to you or not. Is are you tangibly noticing that by using this thing, it is improving you in some way or streamlines some process? That's how I tend to look at tools. It's just a template. Same thing like when you're editing a photo or you're making a website, make a template, it's already pre-selected, it's there. Now you just got to fill in a couple things. You're still building a website, you're still editing an image, but at least you know the process of how it's been made now. And I think our consciousness tools can kind of be like that as well. You can build your intuition to a certain point to where you have assigned certain intuition states to be grabbing data from here, 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 here. And that's like intuition state 1, intuition state 2. You have that all the time. Just templates of mind.
Yeah. And I think another interesting thing, if we're going to explore templating a little bit, I think where we can see a lot of, I would say, I guess debate might be a good word coming up, but I think there needs to be more dialogue around it. But the masculine and feminine energies and the templating around that.
Yeah, those are the major templates right now that we're all interacting with. But it's more of a series of a trait system that can change in relation to you or something. So what we call masculine can be its own energy or feminine can be its own energy. But really we're just taking like a combination of like 1,000 different traits, and depending upon which one is at different levels of strength determines what's masculine, what's feminine. Because they're usually like the polar opposites, right? So someone can be in too much masculine or too much feminine energy. And it really could just mean that they have a series of different things that are out of balance. So it's not that masculinity or femininity is bad or they need to balance it. It's one or two things are off and that would balance you out if you just did that.
Well, I think people also, this is another issue I see that pops up when we're talking about balancing our masculine and feminine energies. I think when that message gets relayed, there's a disconnect because I feel like many people, and I've heard it being taught this way as well, But many people think they have to achieve an equal balance between their feminine and masculine energy, when really, for me, the balance is fostering an awareness on how you're moving and flowing between the two. Because to me, I view it as a dance. Your masculine and feminine energies will be engaged in a dance. Sometimes I'm in more of my feminine energy. Other times I'm in more of my masculine energy when I need to be. If I have a project I need to work on, I really need to be, diving in and getting things done. But I have an awareness on how I'm moving and flowing between the two. I know that I'm more in my masculine, and so I know I need to balance that out by dipping maybe more into my feminine. But again, I think that people have this idea that it should be at this fixed, equal balance, and that's just not realistic and not attainable. And it's almost cruel to hold yourself to that standard of achieving that at all times.
Yeah, you're always flowing in and out of those energies, and different times will call upon you to arrange yourself in different ways. So we even attribute things like masculine energy as like more strength, more of the virtue, more of the defender, guardian archetype, and femininity is more soft and always there in the background and present and available. But what other aspects to masculine femininity are there? Can we create a type of system which shows here's what it means to be masculine, here's what it means to be feminine for the moment, not necessarily for your entire being?
Mm. I think we can look at nature, actually gives a really beautiful perspective on masculine and feminine. And, there's been this whole idea, right, of the feminine rising and taking their power back and sort of pushing the masculine down. When, if you look to nature, it takes both, right? The seasons flow between masculine and feminine seasons. Same thing, women, our menstrual cycles have feminine aspects and masculine aspects. So it's both. So we can find value in both of these. It's really an essence that I feel that I tap into with that. We can find value in both. So we can pull ideas and information into our field in that way, and I believe cultivate it from there instead of looking at just one versus the other. Instead of it being so polarized, let's bring it more to a harmonious flow.
Yeah, it takes two to tango. You need them both, right?
We truly do. I mean, think about it, even to create life, you need both. So instead of trying to, and I get it, right? Like, because the feminine has felt deeply suppressed for like eons and felt like we were being completely erased or stamped out. And to some degree, yes, absolutely. But at the same time, the masculine has also been attacked. So the feminine has been attacked and true masculinity has been attacked. I just think that it was more obvious with the feminine, where there was a slower erosion to true masculinity that really took place over time, to where you almost might not have even caught it, right? Now all of a sudden we're at this place where masculinity is deemed toxic. Why? And I hate that word to describe it too, because I don't think it's fair. I'd like to refer to it as distortions. And there's distortions on both sides. There's distortions within the feminine collective and distortions within the masculine collective. But they have also been deeply attacked, just as the feminine. But it was just a little more obvious, I think, for the feminine collective than the masculine. I mean, do you see that? Do you observe that?
There is an erosion of both, like you said. And with the female collective, it's definitely way more obvious that it happened. And as for the men, it's not as obvious how we're being de-emasculated, because I don't think that collectively we've come to agree what men should be.
Mm.
So it's hard to compare us to what we should be, if that makes any sense. Like, what is wrong with the current male? Because us as men, we still do a lot of things that run and operate the world, and we're still in positions of power for the most part. So it
Right.
doesn't technically look like we're, oppressed in any way. But the oppression is more happening on a psychological level, which is all the invisible stuff that no one else can
Right.
see. And that's really where all the oppression actually is kind of happening within the male is like a deeply psychological war. Whereas with for the feminine, it always was like a physical thing, which is why it was more obvious.
Right. Yeah.
So all the ways that men are being attacked right now, it really has to do with the mind. I don't think it's really anything else. Which is a pretty large terrain when you think about it. I mean, when you're attacked in your mind, it does consume your entire reality. But
Well, the mind is the director, right? The mind directs the lines of creation. So an attack on the mind will attack exactly what we are experiencing in real time, what we are creating.
yeah, there definitely needs to be some collective agreement upon the roles of masculinity and femininity in the world. And also to talk about how those things are two things that can exist within you at different points in time and why that's also useful. Because you'll even recognize in the traditional conservative groups that there's this talk that, you know, a man is this, an alpha male is this, or whatever, and he takes care of his family, does all these things. And all those things are technically true. But there's times like in a male's journey where you'll probably weave in between the feminine for a while to find the deeper parts of yourself, and that won't look very conservative. That was kind of my journey.
Yeah.
And so how we piece together ourselves kind of looks like going from left to right, and then we end up where we are, which is still somewhere within the oscillation of where we're gonna go. And again, that just comes down to that acceptance of our multidimensionality, which isn't really occurring right now.
Also, too, I think there needs to be a release on the expectations or the attachments on what true masculinity or true femininity, what that looks like. And, from observation, I know we were talking about this earlier with the feminine collective really holding expectations and attachment on how the masculine will show up emotionally or in their vulnerability. And they're really expecting it to look as they show up. And I've witnessed this, I've seen this happen many, many, many times, even with friends, where they'll be so mad at their partner and really judge them for not showing up exactly how they want them to show up emotionally. And I was sharing this in my circle call as well, on Wednesday night, and we were speaking into, because I have both women and men in the group, and we were speaking into how we really need to give the masculine some room and some space to show up how they need to in that way, and to stop placing so much expectation on what it looks like. I know there's plenty of women that want their partner to sit down and to journal with them and to pull cards and to, all these different ideas that they have, again, on what it should look like, that they're constructing within their minds, and they're projecting that onto their partner. And in fact, it does quite the opposite. It makes him shy away. It makes him either, reject that ideal or that projection that's being placed upon him. It's more of a repulsion. And they end up shutting down and they feel judged and they don't want to open up. So, yeah, really giving the masculine room and space to show up emotionally and vulnerably as they need to as a man. And I don't think women or the feminine collective have the right to tell them what that should look like. And the same thing for men, with women. It could go both ways. But I've just observed that more with the feminine collective placing that expectation on the masculine in terms of the emotional realm.
Well, the emotional realm is the realm where men have the most hardest time. And so
Right.
to as the woman to nudge men in the direction of figuring out that realm is the right thing to do. But oftentimes men interact with women in ways where they're shamed or guilted for not mastering that realm as well as the women is mastering it. But where it gets paradoxical is because most women aren't actually aware of how they're utilizing their shame and guilt tactics to get men to orient themselves how the woman wants the male to be, which messes up the whole dynamic for males showing up in the way that women actually need them to be for attraction or for to balance out the dynamics. And so when men feel like they're being controlled by women, either partners or wherever, it does make them want to rebel against that. And I think that's what we're witnessing right now, like we talked about in the other episode, like the red pill movement, is it's just
Right.
men avoiding the entire world of women because it's too complicated, don't want to figure it out. I just want to make money. Spin plates is what they say. Spin plates, many dates, do my own thing, have a bunch of women, and you know, whatever. And so you can see how one effect creates the other, but ultimately it is on the man to take over that dynamic and figure that out. But as a man, you'd be surprised how often you get manipulated for being perceived as not doing the work the same way a woman does it. And I mean,
Right.
that's why I think that even my page is kind of growing slowly, and other men that I know grow slowly because women, it doesn't seem like they want to see other men grow and have the limelight and just like be out there spreading information. A lot of the gatekeeping is still existing within the female circles. That's a big thing.
And yeah, that's another piece, right, that we were really speaking into. And well, yes, I truly believe that women are innately wise and hold so much knowledge to be shared that they're oracles in a beautiful sense. Men also hold wisdom and value to be expressed, right? The knowledge that they have. And I love that I have men in my life that I can go to for a different perspective. We can really be teaching each other. Women have their wisdom and knowledge to share and pass along, but men do as well. And we need to start allowing the men to do that instead of really pushing that aside or blocking that and kind of, again, looking at the feminine collective as the gatekeepers of all of the wisdom. Yes, women have wisdom to be shared that maybe men themselves won't be able to express in the way that we're able to express. But the same thing goes for the men, what you have to share. So there's so much that we can teach each other. And I think holding that space instead of placing oneself in a position of superiority over the other, we need to really come back to that we're here to relate with each other. We're here to share with each other. And we can see that, right? Within nature, again, we have both masculine and feminine that comes together and the world goes round, right? So really holding that space for each other. And I think too, another thing I want to speak into, right, is that it is important to have these conversations around this and this dialogue because it can be a fine line at times, right? Women are more emotional. We are in tune with our emotional realm, and we can definitely share a lot of that wisdom with men in that sense to what I like to say is inspire them to rise in their own emotional capabilities, right? But a lot of times it can shift with like, are you, and I ask myself this in my own experience, am I inspiring the men around me to rise in their emotional capabilities or am I demanding it? Right. And that can go back to that complex. Are you being a support system to him or are you coming in and being the savior or are you mothering him? So I think that's why it's really important to have these conversations around this so we can learn how to support each other best instead of placing demands, right? And be more of an inspiration in these realms.
Yeah, ultimately, it's those two different energies that will determine the dynamic. It's so unbelievably simple to support men. All you have to do is basically not sound like you're nagging them and just be there, and they'll work it out. In most cases, that's basically all you need to do. Now, as for men, what we need to do to support women, that's why there's dedicated movements to figure that out. I don't think it's too complicated, but in the mass men collective, it's definitely like, how does that whole work?
Honestly, it's really not that complicated if you can communicate. If you can come in with a conscious dialogue around what is going on, it can really be much more simple. It doesn't have to be that complicated. But you know what? That's another thing. Actually, now that you say that, right? Think about how that's been so deeply programmed within the field. Oh, women are complicated. They're so complicated. You won't be able to figure them out. And yes, I mean, women are emotional and chaotic creatures, but I don't really think it's that complicated when you come through with communication, open dialogue. But that's another piece. Our communication has been so, I feel, attacked in a way because we've been so programmed into what men and women, right, what they want or what we need to mold ourselves to be, to have that ideal partner, right, for women to attract that man, right? I'm supposed to be married already with kids, by a certain age and that whole lifestyle. And men, you're supposed to do A, B, and C to reach that, top tier woman that you want. And so I think in that type of programming, it has in a way affected the way we view each other and the way we communicate with each other. And then, again, attachment and expectation on what that looks like, programs on what that looks like, that we really need to dismantle and reconstruct.
Yeah, there's a lot of programs happening about what males and females should be in the modern world. It's all so interweaved and connected together. Because if you tell men they're supposed to be a certain way or women, it pre-selects the lifeline that they're going to go down. And so then you also have very predictable problems if you go down that path. And so that's what I've always tried to figure out. Is there some force that is intentionally trying to corrupt the world to get us down this path? Or is this just a function of being in your lower paradigm that this stuff will happen anyway? I mean, I don't know. There does appear to be a structure to achieving the good path and achieving the not so good path. It's interesting how that works.
Yeah. I feel we could probably have a whole episode even diving into that.
Because what it means to be a man in these days is increasingly getting different. And the same thing for being a woman. It's more about like what should we be as people? I think we're starting to even move away between man and woman in a sense. Because what that represented in the traditional times was like this fixed role and this fixed role. But we're not really going to return back to what that meant per se. Maybe the energy of it, but the man goes to work and the woman stays at home, like that kind of a thing. It does exist and people are striving for that, but women are now in the workforce and they're doing their thing. And it clearly is beneficial in some way. Women now have all their rights back, equal to men. I mean, we're moving different now. So I think that's what the collective is trying to figure out is like, where is men's role within the changing world that's happening within the female world? Because it used to be so simple. I mean, that really could be a whole other topic as to why we're witnessing that. Because
It really can be.
For men, it's increasingly it is confusing. Because usually you would go to work, you'd make money, and women would flock around you for your resources, and that would be the primary driver of attraction is how well that that man could provide for you. But now women can get their own money. And so the types of men that they go for is not for resources, it's for solely what they're attracted to. So this is why we get a culture that we have a bunch of women who are just attracted to the top tier men because they don't need the plumber, the electrician, the regular guy down the street. And what does that do to create dysfunctional relationships within men when they're no longer needed? The whole paradigm is shifting, and it's really crazy. That's what the red pill tries to talk about, is how to handle that dynamic, which is useful. It's not too important to me, but it is useful to know this as a man, that you're becoming less valuable. So what does that mean? Where can we get our value from other things, not like our career, not from making $1 million? Where can we outsource our value to be more valuable in the spiritual domain, holding down the consciousness grid? But even then, as a man, you'll find that that's manipulation too in a lot of ways. That's the whole
I
path of a
think
man right now.
Yeah, and I think it's being manipulated on all fronts because even with the feminine collective, right? So where's a woman's value? And we're seeing that is that being a mother, bearing children, or what about the women that don't want to do that? And women are being shamed for both. And we're seeing a dialogue there of, well, I want to go to work, I don't want to have kids, and she's being shamed for having that career and not wanting to follow that path. Or another one being shamed for staying home and allowing the man to work and taking on the responsibilities of the household. So right, like how are we sourcing that value? Where are we placing our focus on that value? Right, where's the attention going with that? And how does that relate between our 3D reality and more higher spiritual aspects? Can we bridge that?
Yeah, ultimately, we don't have to follow all this same universal life path to get to some higher consciousness or whatever. Like for a lot of women, I bet having kids and just working their job or their career or experiencing the world for themselves could be the greatest form of empowerment because you don't have to worry about anyone else. You're just worried about you in this lifetime. And for some women that makes sense. And for some men, not following the traditional career path or trying to be like a business owner and maybe still being an employee, but hiking on the weekends and just living a normal life where no one knows you, but you're in your own vibe all the time. I mean, that's just as virtuous. But even in the communities that are speaking about the truth of like where it's supposed to be, like more matrixy style, like truther communities, they're trying to mold everyone just how the religion, and maybe it's even sort of tied into what the religion is telling you to be, that man is this, man's the provider, women is, the subservient to the male, and that's the truth. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's a good structure to play out, but it seems like there's other different timelines here that we can go down that are just as virtuous and are needed.
Yeah. And can it all coexist? I think that's the other piece, again, of trying to bring everybody into one idea or one timeline, one framework, one structure. But can they coexist, right? The multiple. And that goes back into multidimensionality. So it's interesting on how it's all taking shape and form within different dimensions.
Yeah, we all have a role to play in this reality. I mean, there was always the chief of the tribe, and then there's the regular workers, and this person goes and gets berries, this person's the hunter, this is the medicine woman. We all used to have our own role, which was uniquely assigned to what we were good at. But now we all just have jobs, which the majority of people that work their jobs probably aren't even jobs that are that important. They're usually just business to business services or whatever. They don't really provide any value to the world. They're just co-opting between different business metrics and or being a cashier and all this type of stuff. And that's great. But even with the resurgence of artificial intelligence, a lot of those jobs that we all have are just slowly disappearing. So I think that's a
Mm.
calling back into what can humans do that perhaps an AI can't do, which is another topic altogether, which might be the thing that puts us all in the right role.
It's interesting. And so I just remembered something as you were speaking into that, right? And we can dip into the past for some wisdom around this. We had much more support around our roles or developing within our roles, um, and even masculine, collective, feminine, collective. And you touched on this last time. We spoke into rites of passage and how the men really don't have as much support around rites of passage. And for me, in personal experience, just through observation, I feel the feminine collective has more support in that because they transition from maiden to mother, and we have support around that, or even girls transitioning, into womanhood. There's a lot more dialogue and support around that, which again can still be deeply refined. And where the men, I think, are lacking in that type of support.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I said in the other episode, I don't really think I've had a proper rites of passage, and I can even feel genetically within my being what I missed out on. Obviously, you can still do those things, like you said, you have your friend that does that. But when I look back at myself when I was a younger kid, like a youth, 15, 18, 20, and so on, I definitely needed something to snap me into reality and say, hey, this is how reality works. Here's your role now. Go off and we'll support you, whatever you need to do. But you've now made this transition from boy to man. And here's this whole set of things, what that's supposed to mean. Men don't get that. And I would say that what we call toxic masculinity is a result of not going through that process and the male allowing themselves to chaotically just disconfigure in any way and go untamed essentially. That's what we call toxic masculinity. If we don't want to use that word, but like that, I think that's what it is. Because true masculinity
Right.
will default into a whole set of traits which don't look toxic at all. So what we need in reality is more masculinity that's anchored and properly put together. And that happens through a
Right.
rites of passage.
Well, really, in simple form, think of rites of passage. Again, what is that? It's experiential learning. You're going through that experience, through that transition. And that's where you're gaining those pearls of wisdom from that you can take forward with you on your journey, on your path, wherever that path leads you. Whatever choice points you make and lines of creation you decide to form with that is up to you. But having that support through that, right? You're cultivating your awareness, you're pulling in data streams, information that you need to progress on your path, to build out your path, whether that's going to be vertical, horizontal, whatever it is. But you can use that to your advantage to build out your path or your lines of creation.
Yeah. I think the rites of passage for many has been distorted. So a man's rites of passage has become to be super successful in the world. And like I said, that's one area that definitely can get you there, but the real rites of passage is something that happens on a metaphysical level. And that's where we talked about the psychedelics, in our previous one, how
Right.
psychedelics can entrance you in that type of reality where you see there's a much larger picture to your life, which ultimately is the result of a rites of passage that's trying to get you to that point where you see your life as a hero's journey, as a mission, in a sense, to save yourself. I think that's what we're doing when we're trying to consciously upgrade, is to retrieve parts of ourselves and put ourselves together like we're this puzzle piece. Feels that way.
It does. Yeah. It absolutely does. That lands, that resonates a lot, actually.
That's how it always feels to me when I'm tapping into the internal world and I create my own sphere around me. I can feel how different directions of my awareness, there's these patches and these holes within it that you can learn to fill and retexturize and make it new. but some holes of yourself feel like they will only be patched and cleared when you remap over it through a new pattern or through interacting with life. And so when you gain a principle or a trait, or you act in a trustworthy way, or you tell the truth about something, or you act in a way which principles come out of you, that actually puts your reality together.
Falling into pieces. Yeah.
The pieces are made out of principalities. That's why they have the commands, the 10 commandments that you have to command to yourself. Even a command, that's a computer program, right?
Well, right, exactly. That's exactly what I was just thinking of when you said that.
You type a command in your terminal. Now that that's installed, I think we're always just witnessing that effect of interacting with the hologram, but even the conversation around how the earth and ourselves are a type of holographic program, even that's become taboo for some reason.
But it's just another level, it's just another database, right? We can tap into multiple. And again, that just leads me back to multidimensionality. There's so much wisdom and information and code we can pull from nature in the physical world, but we can also gain so much from viewing life that way, right? The mind, or in terms of a holographic reality, you're going to program your field, cultivate the internal world that leads to the external manifestation. And there's other levels and other, fields that we can tap into as well. So yeah, I think it has gotten a little taboo for some people, but why not? Why can't we explore it all?
Yeah, ultimately when any terrain you can just explore it and go into it, that's true freedom. When you can go into anything and figure it out and trust yourself that you'll come out okay. Even going into the darkness feels that way, because where you're going to retrieve all the best parts of yourself is through the unconscious elements that are playing out that you have to then retrieve and remap your reality in some way. And that's essentially going into the unknown. But the thing about the unknown, which is kind of strange, is the more you go into it, you'll recognize that it is known. You just forgot about it.
Right. Well, same thing too when you think about darkness, right? Think about how that's been programmed to be viewed. People view darkness as something that's bad or evil when it's really not. Look at the soil, right? That is darkness, but does not a seed sprout up and form new life? The womb, dark, but that will yield and birth new life. The void, right? So we can look at all these different pieces and exactly like how you said with the known versus the unknown. And yeah, just interesting dynamics.
Yeah, everything has to come from something. So is nothing something? Seems like it.
The paradox of it all.
That's what I'm always thinking about. Like, where do the edges of my experience live? Because you're here in physical reality and you can touch yourself and, all right, I end here. But if you close your eyes enough and you just sit there and like you tap yourself, like where do you actually exist within that? Because you can like tap your leg somewhere or tap your shoulder or your arm to a certain point and you don't know where that feels anymore. Where is the feeling process? And so I think that even where our feelings are located are also a type of database that exists somewhere. Where's all the sensory perception modules? And so I wonder if we could upgrade each individual database directly and create a type of curriculum for each component of ourself. That's what I think that this project is going to eventually turn into. Where we design reality, we create reality components for upgrading these little portions of yourself. That's why I always am seeing for this project. I just don't know what that looks like yet.
Well, I think through that, you'll be able to really tap into two pieces, right? So, and I love how you brought up edges because that's something I've been deeply working with. But through these different modules, as you were just speaking into, it can really help us tap into two things: the consciousness and the embodiment, because they're separate. To know something and to be something are two different things. One's a consciousness, one's an embodiment. So, in terms of that, when you're speaking of edges, something I always like to play around with is knowing the edge and being the edge, right? Having conscious awareness of the edges, but also being and riding that edge, right? Can I meet my edges? Can I play within my edges? Can I push myself past my edges? How many edges are there that I'm accessing? Are there more, right? There's so much that we can really explore and play around with there. But we can really, I think, utilize it in a way to expand and cultivate conscious awareness around it, and then use that to really shape the embodiment.
Yeah, we're always interacting with those edges. They're like dimensional walls that we enter into. We get close to the edge of it, and then we recognize that some part of our potential lies beyond it. But we hit it, and sometimes go back. We hit it, we sometimes go back, but we always know when it's there. I think to a certain
Right.
extent, we could call these things like when people talk about like I have anxiety or something, I'm so anxious, I'm this or that. I think that's another type of edge. So
Mm.
even the pharmaceutical descriptions of what we call like ADHD, OCD, all of these mental disorders are just configurations of how we are interacting with time and space differently and the limitations of the self perceiving that. So,
Yeah, well, even in that, right? Think
yeah.
of anxiety. It's not just one thing. You could be like anxious, nervous about something, or you could be anxious, excited about something.
Yeah, I think I even heard some podcast someone said that all a professional does is turn an anxious feeling of like threat or something, and they turn that anxiousness and turn it into excitement. And that's the difference between like someone who's an expert at something or someone who is scared to
Mm.
perform. Because they
Ooh,
feel
yeah.
similar. You're always scared
Well,
to
right.
do something that is big for you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's that on a spectrum, right? You can have that nervousness, or it could be around fear, whatever it may be, if you're your first time doing something, let's say, and then the more you do that, you can change that and shift that into an anxious excitement. Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's all about translating moments and turning them into different things and optimizing your experience. I
Mm.
think that naturally, when you get older, that just starts to happen, especially for men. You start to crystallize into a different form of your being that was just bound to happen anyway. And for a period of time, you're just going to be a little bit lost, confused, and eventually it works itself out. For men in particular, I definitely notice that that's true. Like around the age of 27, uh, I've talked to so many
Still
people like
specific.
that's,
Still specific. 27.
yeah, around 27, you just crystallize into the form of your being. 25 and up, that's when you start to feel like, okay, I'm now myself. Before then, I was just figuring it out. So common. Maybe that happens for women as well.
It's funny actually that you bring that up because I've been sitting, with that. My birthday will be approaching fairly soon, and I'm getting closer to my 40s. But yeah, I was doing more of like I guess a life review, you could say, and just thinking back for my 20s and now my 30s. And yeah, for me, it was like this whole experience through my 30s and getting closer to 40 where I feel like, yeah, like this is me. I really know myself. I've hit that point, but it's been later in life as opposed to earlier. So it's interesting that you can say that around 27, where I'm feeling that at 37.
It probably is, it happens in stages. Every year that I look back on my life, I was a different person. So, but somewhere along the trail of that, there starts to become a solidified line of where the changes are going to start to look more self similar. They even say that men mature older. So that could be something. But you've had a
Mm.
series of spiritual awakenings. So, of course, you're going to change and be different.
Well, it's the evolvement, right? It's that evolvement that happens through your life journey and with the experiences that you collect, right? And that even goes back, so we could even look at alchemy there. With the whole process of alchemy, through your direct experiences, right? You start to weed out the dross and you collect the true metals that you take forward with you on your journey. So through that direct experience, that's really all what we're doing. We're discarding the dross and collecting the true metals. That's why I think older people are deemed so wise because of the collection of the metals that they have achieved throughout their journey, through that alchemical process of life.
Hmm. That makes me think also about how in the male communities, for instance, they talk about how you don't want to be with a woman who's like past her 30s because she's hit the wall. Like that's their terminology. She's hit the
Not true.
wall. She's no longer like she's done for. And I always found that to be interesting because if men only view women from the lens of how their value to them is only their physical attractiveness, then that could be true, but women have so much more to offer beyond those ages. So I even notice how in those male communities there's this mass rejection of the female is only valuable to me in this one domain and everything else discard it. And I always thought that was kind of weird to me because the older women get, the more wise they really do get. And
Mm.
that's the actual value of a woman. So that whole community is really strange when you look at it.
I think there's a huge distortion there too, and I feel a lot of the times they're gearing it towards more of a physicality and even sexuality. I think there's a distortion there where they're viewing the younger woman more desirable sexually when actually women as they age, like I think they say it's like women kind of reach their peak at 40, really become more, sexual. And through my life journey, I can observe that. I can attest to that. Where I feel more in my prime now than I did in my younger years. But in my younger years, that's viewed as more desirable. So yeah, there's a lot of distortion there.
Yeah, all those landscapes are super strange right now because again, it's just things that feel true that are told were true but aren't true.
Mm.
I
And how
mean,
does that get you? Right?
yeah,
We talked about that on the last one, right? So again, for sake of argument, when we're hearing these things, let's say there's like 70% truth there, but it's weaved or laced with like 30% of lies. It hooks people in because it strikes a familiar chord, right? A vibratory familiarity. And so you're more willing to accept that as being true because it resonates. But you don't realize that through that 30% of lies that have been weaved throughout, you're in a false resonance or in a bandwidth that's been corrupted. But it hooks you with that. It really, I always get the vision of fishing. So casting out that rod, hooking the fish and reeling it in. It's very easy to do because it strikes that familiar chord. And if you've been hearing it your whole life and it's been programmed within your field that way, of course it's going to strike a familiar chord.
yeah. And what happens if you're receiving 70% of the truth about one topic here and then 70% about another one here and here and here and here? Now the entire ratio of how you're perceiving life almost starts to be basically entirely incorrect because you have so many things out of order. I think that's what we're all unwinding through is figuring out which topics are true, which ones are the
Mm.
best, and slowly we discard bad information.
right? And that is a big question, right? Is it truly your perception, or is it the projected perception of somebody else?
That's what I'm always returning back to. If hearing
Yeah.
this information, I wouldn't have directly came up with this myself, or have discovered this through an organic style of things just hitting my reality, should I actually believe this or not? I mean, there's a lot of things that, come now in the form of communication and social media that you can't avoid new information coming in. But for the majority
Oh,
of things that you yeah, the majority of the things that you build your own world from and decide, here are my fixed beliefs. If you can insource that as much from your own self, you'll find that all the other beliefs that you're told you're supposed to believe are other people's perceptions of that thing, and it doesn't have to be true. And it isn't true when you don't believe it. Things are only true to the level of how much you want to believe that.
oh, exactly, right. If you want to believe it to be true, it will be true for your experience.
Yeah, I mean, the collective is always shifting around, and so the worst place to outsource all of who you are and your belief systems is the collective consciousness. Like, I'm following this YouTuber just a month ago. He was saying that he kind of like reads the news or whatever and interprets it in his own lens. And he was saying,
Interesting.
and it's useful to me to, watch that from time to time, because I it's mostly what I believe as well. So I've already reconfirmed what I believe and what he believes, and so it's just a convenient way to do that. It's not
Right.
opposite or whatever. But just like last month, he was saying World War III is extremely inevitable. It's going to happen. There's a high probability. And then just this morning, he posted that there's almost no probability. It's probably not going to happen, or whatever. And so it always makes me think, like, well, what changed? Because
Mm.
you know what I mean? It was so high probability back then, but now there's almost no probability. And so much of that, in order to update yourself and update your beliefs, you always have to stay in resonance with what the collective is to then monitor and change your beliefs. And again, it's just not a very efficient process. Just always get information from
Yeah.
yourself.
Well, that's another big piece I've sat with for quite some time. And we can really, kind of zoom in on the past couple years from like 2020 to now. And really what we've been putting out there. And we speak into, right, the power of creation, the power of consciousness, and what we are energizing between our intentions and our attention that we're creating, at all times. And, really sitting back and zooming out then and looking at what are we creating? Because, right, all the truther accounts and all, everybody wanting to speak into what is going on in the world, and, the psyops and the this and the that. And there's so much information. We're flooding it out at all times. And, who's speaking into, the downfall of the financial system and how catastrophic this is going to be, or World War III, is inevitable, like you just stated. And, and I'm really zooming out and I'm like, what are we speaking into? What are we creating here? Do we really want to speak into energetics and timelines that are going to be catastrophic? If we keep speaking into that and breathing life into it, are we ultimately creating that? Can we shift that by how we are energizing that and speaking into it? Does it have to be as catastrophic as everybody's making it out to be? I understand from sharing information from a standpoint of wanting people to be prepared. But are we doing more harm than good sometimes by how we are energizing that and speaking into it repeatedly and pumping it out and pumping it out? Don't we have a responsibility here at some point with what we are energizing? And we keep speaking on how we are these creators, but I don't know. I just think there needs to be more consciousness in terms of that, the creator and the creation.
Yeah, well, it goes back to how there's different groups of people that are all speaking about these things. So no one is
Right?
really on the same page about anything. Because a lot of the
No,
spiritual people that I follow, they don't talk about World War III or whatever. They're more
no,
talking
it's all love and
about
light.
it's all love and light, or they're talking about how the reptilians are coming to invade the earth. They're in their whole other form of World War III. And
Oh
mainly
yeah,
it's
the
the
terraforming and all of that, and yeah.
And then there's the conservative types who I probably mostly align with, but that's a whole other thing. I mean, they're talking about how the actual World War III. And so we can't even come to agreement with how we're being attacked by what figure, which when we get down to it, we'll find that it's portions of ourselves that are attacking ourselves anyway. We're just creating whichever convenient enemy that we want to believe. The more material you are in material 3D consciousness, the more you will assume it's a person or a military or a person. And the more you are spiritual, you'll recognize it's probably like some hyperdimensional, interdimensional beings, which it's a bit of both, really. But I mean, we can't even come to agreement with like who is the enemy if we were to
Right.
collectively make one. What is it? What is the God that we all want to believe in? Because there's apparently one religion says they got the best one.
Right.
Another one says
Right.
they got the best one. Another one says they're all right. And we have hundreds of thousands. So we need to down to the basics of like what is anything anymore, describe it, and make use of that repository and move forward.
Right. Well, too, it's like all of it is existing at the same time. It's all taking place at the same time. And honestly, based on your belief, that's what you are going to experience. So there are groups of people right now who absolutely are probably having the experience that World War III is taking place, where you and I are sitting here and we're like, no, like that's not our experience because that's not what we believe. So your belief is truly shaping your experience because you believe it to be true. You're energizing that, and that is reflected right internally to the external. But it's like so all these different realities are taking place at the same time based on everybody's different beliefs. Like you could be standing next to somebody and you are literally existing in two different worlds at the same time.
Yeah, all the time. Every
Yeah.
person is their own portal, has their own
Yeah.
orb around them, which is their entire life and the theme of how they view reality from. And
Right.
so, collective consciousness, individual consciousness, they're different things. And right now, I think that the collective is going through some type of an awakening. But,
Yeah.
I mean, as long as they're awakening, I guess that's fine.
Something's happening, that's for sure.
It's going to happen in stages. Some people are, like we talked about, are on different levels. And I think
Yeah.
that part of it needs to be addressed and brought back into it again. Because there are levels to the game, and if it is a game, that means that some people have just played the game longer, so they're more familiar with all the challenges and quests and
Yeah.
distractions and enemies and weapons and all that stuff.
Some don't even know they're playing.